So we all remember The Amazing Spider-Man 2, right? It was the follow-up to The Amazing Spider-Man, and unfortunately it fell flat on its face between studio meddling and just terrible direction when it came to the villains in this movie, as well as just some pretty odd choices such as bringing up Harry. It was not done very well. But I want to ask something. What did The Amazing Spider-Man do right? Because every movie does something right. And so I watched this movie a few more times and I figured out exactly what it got right. I figured out that underneath all of the poor decisions and strange marketing, this movie could tell an amazing love story. Yeah, that's right, a love story. That's really what this movie did its best at, and it's what the first movie was really good at too. Now, that's not the only thing this movie did well. I think it handled a lot of Spider-Man's aspects pretty decently, specifically his quips.
Webhead, you can call me amazing, just don't call me late for dinner, you get it? Not a shaker? Yeah.
At least in the intro, Spider-Man seemed to have been characterized pretty well. We see him trying to stop destruction and we see him saving people. The way in which he interacted with Max Dillon feels like something straight out of a comic book issue. The way in which Peter talks to him and sort of just tries to help him, even in the midst of all of this destruction. But like I said earlier, where this movie truly shines is in its interpersonal relationship between Gwen and Peter, and the interpersonal conflict Peter feels as he is bound by a responsibility to not be close to Gwen, despite his overwhelming desire to want to be there. We got to see their relationship blossom heavily throughout the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, and I think it was the best part of the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. But in this movie, there's a new layer to it. When Captain Stacy died to save Spider-Man's life at the end of the first movie, he made one request, and that was for Peter to stay out of Gwen's life completely. At the end of the first movie, we were teased that the best promises are often broken, and that Peter would break this promise to be with Gwen. But in the second movie, in the first 20 minutes, we are shown the fallout of that on Peter mentally. We have to see him struggle with the realization that he is breaking his promise in order to be with the woman he loves, and for him, that is something that is clearly haunting him in the form of hallucinations almost. And this leads Peter to being in an on-again, off-again relationship with Gwen, and we're about to see the off again.
It's my father, isn't it?
Yeah. I see it everywhere I go. I don't know what to do, and I can't get him out of my head.
Yeah, but we've talked about this.
I know, Gwen.
It's not his choice.
Gwen. I promised him that I would keep away from you.
And I mean, even Gwen knew that the fact that her father is dead bothers Peter. She knew it exactly, and yet she was still willing to do this relationship despite the promise that was made, because of her love for Peter, because how much she loved him. So when Peter breaks it off again, to Gwen, this is really almost like an insult to her, and it hurts her a lot worse. And so when Peter breaks up with her for another time, she just simply can't handle it. Gwen is over the constant up and downs of their relationship, and no matter how much she loves Peter, how much she understands his need to be Spider-Man, or just understands Peter on a fundamental level, she just can't keep doing this to herself if Peter can't make up his mind. And of course, this is killing Peter on the inside. And this hurt leads to Peter quite literally stalking Gwen as Spider-Man throughout the city of New York. He is taking time out of his day from being a superhero to look at Gwen. He is having this internal conflict of his love for her and his want to see her, and his responsibilities of being Spider-Man and to keep the promise that he made. And for him, it is extremely hard. So when Gwen does decide to text Peter and ask him to come visit her one last time, he can't possibly say no, despite it means breaking his promise once again. I think this scene is strangely important to the relationship between Peter and Gwen. The two of them are separated by this long barrier of cars, something that when Peter tries to cross, he is almost hit repeatedly by different vehicles, whether they be bikes or cars. Think of them almost as the obstacles the two have to overcome in order to be in a relationship. As Peter is willfully ignoring the danger in front of him, in order to go see Gwen. And I think it could be considered some sort of subtle foreshadowing for how this movie does end. Now, when the two of them do get to meet and they do see each other, it is Peter who is hesitant to even want to be close to Gwen, despite how badly he needs to be there. And even though Peter is there, sort of pretending to be there as a friend for Gwen, it's very, very clear that he still loves her a lot, and Gwen can definitely see through his BS in this situation, and it's honestly kind of funny. That, and she also realizes that Peter has been following her for the last couple of days, just casually.
Have you been following me? I knew it. How often?
Just once a day. Sometimes.
You see, Gwen didn't necessarily ask Peter out here and out to have a fun night on the town to rekindle their relationship or get back what they lost. Gwen needed to have a serious and a hard conversation with Peter, and that was that she had accepted a scholarship in England, and she was going to go take it. She was going to go do school in London, England, and essentially leave him and his Spider-Man problems and everything else behind. The death of her dad was a lot harder on her than I think Peter honestly got, and his constant bringing it up, and that's why they can't be in the relationship, further pushed Gwen away, as she was really using Peter as her own rock. And if you can imagine, Peter wasn't exactly too thrilled by this news.
England? Really?
And a recurring theme happens in this movie, which is whenever Peter is presented with a hard time or a hard conversation, he seems to just disappear into being Spider-Man. His other life is taking over, and he's essentially using Spider-Man as almost an outlet for all of these problems. And to top it all off, Gwen follows him whenever he is having these issues. She tends to be the one to follow him even as he's rushing off to be Spider-Man. To build off what I was saying earlier, when there is no more Spider-Manning left to do throughout the city for Peter, he throws himself into something else to avoid thinking about him and Gwen. He throws himself into trying to figure out where his father left and why his father left him. Peter is still somewhat that little kid whose dad left him at a very young age, and part of Peter just can't let that go. He wants to figure out why his dad left, what his dad was doing that made him leave, and why he just never sees or hears anything about his father at all. And this is far more preferable for Peter than facing the reality that his true love, the person who really understands him to the core, is going to leave, and that partly the reason she's leaving is because of him and the way he mishandled their relationship. And something that's also even more interesting is that he pins Gwen to this wall of conspiracies he's trying to figure out. It's clear she's still central in his mind, and we sort of see that at the very next time those two characters are together. The next time we see these two characters, Peter was at Oscorp checking in on Harry, and if you're wondering why I haven't talked about him, it's because he is not good, and I want this video to be more positive. So when Peter and Gwen are hiding from some security guards who are looking for Gwen because she happened to notice Oscorp employee had fallen into a vat of eels and is presumed dead, and Oscorp themselves are trying to cover it up, as any great company would. But Peter is less focused on what Gwen's telling him and more focused with wanting to make out with Gwen. But honestly, that's pretty real. Peter's like an 18-year-old in this movie, and it's definitely something that would probably have happened IRL. But regardless, Peter also does feel the responsibility to help and protect Gwen. Peter creates a distraction so that Gwen can get away before all of these security guards come and find her. But the reality is still there that Peter and Gwen are probably not getting back together, and it gets even worse when Peter comes home and he sees that Aunt May has found his Alex Jones conspiracy theorist-esque wall. And she isn't just concerned by this, she is deeply frustrated. She is frustrated that Peter is still trying to look for this perfect father that he misses so dearly, who wasn't around. Yet Aunt May has been there, especially after Ben's death. She has been there constantly for Peter. She took care of him growing up. She still does his laundry to this day. and she still loves him so much. She's picked up extra shifts and is learning to be a nurse so she can provide for him to go to college. And it really wears on her that Peter is more interested in his father than he is in her, and that's how she feels. And I think this scene is really wonderfully done in the way Aunt May expresses this to Peter. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Your stupid, non-scientific aunt who doesn't know how to make ends meet, who has to take nursing classes with 22-year-old kids so I can pay for you to go to college, and I don't know how to do this without Ben. I don't know how. And you're dreaming about your perfect father who was never here. No, I won't tell you. You're my boy. As far as I'm concerned, you're my boy, and I won't hurt you.
And Peter has to try to explain to Aunt May that he's not doing this out of the fact that he doesn't love her. He values her more than anything. He's doing this because he seeks to understand, and partly because he seeks escapism from his current problems. And so Aunt May reluctantly tells Peter everything she knows about FBI involvement, about the secrets, and Peter is left in complete and utter disbelief. He simply just believed that his parents were Oscorp scientists and that they were just wonderful, smart people. And unfortunately, unlike Aunt May wanted, this just happens to make Peter spiral even more. His parents are dead, still under mysterious circumstances involving the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Peter's girlfriend is still going to leave him. Peter's best friend Harry is still dying and he could save him, but he doesn't know if he should. And all of this leans heavy on Peter. He is feeling like the world is crushing him. And so who's the first person he goes to when he needs to vent, to let out what's going on? It's Gwen. Even though Gwen is quite literally trying to go get herself registered to go to college in England, she's quite literally getting ready to leave in a couple of days for England, and yet Peter is running up to her talking about these crazy conspiracy theories, talking about Spider-Man, talking about Harry's death, and he is quite literally on the verge of having a full-on breakdown. And Gwen wasn't really the most receptive to this. In her mind, she's already moving on with her life, and Peter is interrupting her future, almost like holding her back. And Peter, when he recognizes this, tries to deflect all of his issues with humor, which is something I find very interesting about Peter in this film. Is they don't show it very often, but he quite literally is deflecting his sadness with nothing but straight jokes, almost as though he was Spider-Man. Now, this does prompt Gwen to actually be concerned about Peter and to try and understand what is going on with him. But Peter is kind of realizing that he's got to let go at this point, that whatever him and Gwen had might just be done, and he needs to recognize this. She's going off to England. She's leaving, and he still can't reconcile with this. And this is almost like him simply saying goodbye for the last time in person, at least in his mind. And of course, what's the first thing Peter does when he is once again confronted with reality and he is frustrated? He starts to tear down his wall. He is frustrated that he doesn't know anything about what's going on with his dad. He's frustrated that Gwen's leaving. He's angry, so he's tearing everything up. He's trying to get rid of it all. And in his rage, in his anger, he seems to find these coins. Coins that he thinks might lead him to his next big clue about his father. Again, Peter would rather throw himself into some forgotten mystery than really confront what's going on in his life. Now, is this important to Peter? Definitely. But it really should have taken place in the first movie and not this one, but that's besides the point. So Peter finds the railway station that will take these coins, and he goes to look for any sort of clues on that place. Have I mentioned how silly it looks when he Googles stuff in this movie? It's actually hilarious. And when Peter does arrive at the train station, he finds a computer with a recording from his father. In the recording, it goes into detail that essentially Peter's dad was a whistleblower. Norman Osborn was essentially taking money from a foreign government to fund Peter's father's spider project in the hopes of making super soldiers for this foreign country and essentially using Richard Parker's research as a super weapon. And the second Richard found this out, he decided to stand on business. He decided to report them to the proper authorities, knowing this is probably the last time he'll ever see his son, and knowing that he's probably going to get killed for this. he really took "with great power comes great responsibility" to heart. And knowing that he was never going to see his son again, he still did this. And I think Peter finally gets his dad in this scene. And he finally gets the closure he has spent 2 movies looking for when it comes to his father figure. I think that's important for Peter. And his ability to finally move on from the mystery of what happened to his parents. And I think it's good for him. But not everything positive came out of this little trip. While Peter was off discovering about his father, he had missed a pretty important call from Gwen and a pretty important visit from her too.
Peter, it's me. I got into Oxford. Woohoo! It's very exciting. I came by your house a little bit ago and you weren't there, and so I'm on my way to the airport right now because there's this early summer class that I found out about, and I thought that it would somehow be easier, I guess, this way.
When Peter realizes that he's basically completely missed his chance to say goodbye, he was not going to let that slide. He knows how busy this bridge is, and I think Peter was finally ready to move on with his life from just being Spider-Man and from just saving the world. Peter was ready to be with the woman he loves, ready to let go of the guilt of his past, and ready to finally embrace what he could have. And so he swings to the top of the bridge and writes "I love you" in spider webs on the bridge for Gwen to see. And I think it's a really beautifully done moment, especially when you see how many people are stopping to look, as Peter is almost outing himself by doing this. And the scene between the 2 of them on top of the bridge is absolutely breathtaking, both visually, but also in the sort of catharsis you get seeing these 2 characters finally being together once again, as Peter basically agrees to go to London with Gwen and live with her, to go to college with her, and to love with Gwen, to finally let go of the promise he made, and to finally let go of all of his responsibilities that were holding him back, that weren't really his responsibility. But unfortunately, not everything can go well because, this is a Spider-Man movie, and we need to finish off the main villain first before we get any sort of happy endings. Or in this case, extremely bittersweet endings. Yeah, haven't really mentioned the villains in this movie, mainly because they kind of suck, but Electro is Max Dillon, and he's looking for revenge because Spider-Man ignored him, and Harry is really pissed that Peter, aka Spider-Man, didn't give him his blood, so he has to deal with both of them now. But something I enjoy that I know a lot of people don't is the fact that Gwen gets involved with this fight. She wants to see Peter succeed so badly that she shows up to potentially one of the most dangerous encounters that Peter's ever had, and decides to help him out simply because she loves him so much. And I think the way she words it to him is very well done.
What are you, a caveman?
Shouldn't be here.
You tie me up to go off to war? I know how to help you.
What are you doing
I know the grid specs. I can reset the system.
You can't be here right now. I'm not messing around. You can't be here right now. This is insane.
Guess what? Nobody makes my decisions for me. All right? Nobody. This is my choice. Okay? My choice.
Gwen loves Peter so much that she's willing to put her life on the line to help him. And I think it's a beautiful scene, but unfortunately her risk-taking behavior would come back to bite her. Because during the fight between Peter and Harry, Gwen ends up caught in this serious crossfire. And it's hard to see, as Peter and Gwen have been fighting for their relationship this entire movie. The 2 of them have been keeping each other separate due to a bunch of random forces, sometimes outside of their control and sometimes inside of their control. Whether that's Peter's feelings of guilt, whether that's Gwen going off to the UK for college. It's all culminating in this one scene and Peter's one chance to save Gwen. And so he does everything he thinks he can in order to save the woman he loves. But unfortunately for Peter, this is a Spider-Man movie and nothing ever works out. Just when Peter was going to have it all, he was going to have his girlfriend, he was going to be able to still be Spider-Man if he wanted to, he was going to be able to let go of his father, it's like he takes 2 steps forward and 1 step back every single time. as Peter quite literally just lost the love of his life in the exact same way that Captain Stacy said he would if he kept Gwen involved with his life as Spider-Man. And this grief sends Peter spiraling, as it would most people. I could not imagine going through something like this, and for Peter it's gotta be 10x'd by the fact that it is truly his fault. And it ends up leading Peter into a deep depression for multiple months. He pretty much just bums around and spends all of his time at Gwen's grave, unable to move on from what has happened. Whether that's in fall, whether that's in summer, whether it's in winter, we see multiple seasons pass where Peter is just sitting there waiting. But there were two people that were able to pull Peter out of this state, and it starts with Aunt May. Peter notices that Aunt May is packing up Uncle Ben's stuff and asks her why. He's concerned that she's gonna throw it away, just give up on that piece of their life. But Aunt May explains to Peter that she's not throwing it away, she's simply putting it where it belongs, to still have the stuff and to still remember the person, but remember the good, not to let the bad and the negative outweigh their current living situations. She knows that Ben would want her to be living her happiest life if he was not around. And I think Aunt May does this in front of Peter specifically to let him know that it is okay to move on and that Gwen would want more for him than to just be sad and to be sitting at her grave all of the time. But even though Peter may or may not have gotten it from Aunt May, gotten the idea, he has not been Spider-Man for the last couple months. New York has been without their hero. As Spider-Man's a part of Peter, sure, but Gwen was a much larger part, and he couldn't put on that mask. At least not until he listened to Gwen's graduation speech. Something he missed because he was too busy being Spider-Man. And as cheesy as this speech is, and as much as it seems like it's written for being a superhero and not for a high school graduation, I think it's pretty profound, and I personally like it. It reminds me a lot of Uncle Ben's speech at the end of the first movie.
It's easy to feel hopeful on a beautiful day like today. But there will be dark days ahead of us too. There will be days where you feel all alone. And that's when hope is needed most. No matter how buried it gets, or how lost you feel, you must promise me that you will hold on to hope. Keep it alive. We have to be greater than what we suffer. My wish for you is to become hope. People need that. And even if we fail, what better way is there to live? As we look around here today at all of the people who helped make us who we are, I know it feels like we're saying goodbye, but we will carry a piece of each other into everything that we do next, to remind us of who we are and of who we're meant to be.
Alright, so you may be wondering, we're kind of nearing the end of this video, and I pretty much spent zero time talking about the villains of this movie, and honestly that's because they sucked. They were both pretty half-baked. Harry was absolutely just thrown in there for Sinister Six synergy. Thank you, Avi Arad, for once again meddling with one of these movies. But I think Electro had a lot of promise. In the comics, Electro is essentially a blank slate. Every single time we've seen him in a different medium, he's had a different personality. And I think there really could have been something to Electro being scorned by the fact that his hero, his idol, Peter, didn't remember him. I think it could have made for a good plot point. This movie at the beginning really plays up the fact that Peter's obsession with his family, with finding his father, is basically mirrored by Electro with his feelings of wanting to be seen by the world, and specifically by his idol Spider-Man, his absolute obsession with the character. And I think they really could have done something with that to show the two different sides of obsession and how you can lose yourself in the obsession. Now, I think this was maybe the original plan simply because these two scenes are put back to back from each other, but this plot point is almost entirely dropped post this like one scene that I'm surprised made it past the cutting room floor. And honestly, I just am really frustrated by that because this movie could have done so much more had it focused on Electro and done what it was best at. This movie was at its absolute best when it was showing the interpersonal relationships between Peter and the cast of characters around him, especially bouncing off of Aunt May and or Gwen. I think that was what the movie was best at. Instead of having Peter fight multiple villains in a single movie, or because they needed to set up for the Sinister Six for a potential sequel and expanded universe, much like the MCU was doing, they didn't need all of that. When the movie was so amazing when it honed in on its characters, when it showed us just how good Spider-Man is as a person, and when it slowed down to just say, hey, look, Spider-Man doesn't like bullies, to show us what a day in the life of being Spider-Man is like, to show us what it's like for him to live in New York and to see the positive impact he has on other people. I think these scenes were absolutely amazing. And of course, not to mention the very best part of both of these films, the relationship between Peter and Gwen. And unfortunately, even if two people are amazing for each other, that sometimes it just doesn't work out. And I think that's okay. This movie really was at its best when it focused on these two characters and focused on Spider-Man as a person. And I wish we got more of that, because this movie could have been so much greater. And instead I'm left wondering, what could we have had? Okay, wow. That was a lot sadder of an ending than I envisioned, but I think it really does encapsulate how I feel about this film. I think I've worked through, gosh, probably 13 different scripts for this episode. This video has been on my to-do list for about 4 months. I've been slowly chipping away at it, but every time I come back to it, I write a different draft of the script. I want to talk about different things in the movie. Originally, when I first wrote this, it was going to essentially just be dunking on this movie and being like, haha, look, it's bad. But I don't think we gain anything from just saying bad movie is bad. I think we should look at why a movie could have been better, why it could have been really good if it wasn't for simple studio involvement and meddling and all that other fun stuff Avi Arad loves to do in his free time. And I think I'm overall a lot happier with this draft of my script. I had this project on my table for about 4 months, just trying to get it done. And I have a personal connection to this movie. I remember going in theaters and watching this movie. It was one of the first Spider-Man movies I had seen in theaters. And when Gwen died, it was something that impacted me. I didn't expect it as a kid, but I assume anybody who'd read comics or whatever and probably watched the trailers expected it, right? Because trailers tell kind of everything now. I just want to say thank you all for watching. This video turned into something of a passion project for me, and I definitely didn't expect it when I was first planning it out 4 months ago, after I had covered the original Amazing Spider-Man, which is my second favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. It gave me some time to recontextualize this movie and look at it from a different light, and I think we could find some real positives inside of this movie. That's if you watch maybe the hour worth revision that I talked about for this instead of the full movie. We're almost at 8,000 subs as I record this, so shout out to you all. And if you are seeing this and you've made it this far, shout out to you. And I want to hear, what was your favorite part of the two Amazing Spider-Man movies? Just leave it down in the comments below. If you liked the video, please give me a like. If you disliked it, dislike it. Tell me what's wrong, what's missing, all those fun stuff. And finally, if you're feeling so inclined, I do have a Patreon where you can see these videos early and unedited if you want to support me. Don't feel like you have to. Your viewership is support enough. And if you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsubscribe later. So once again, thank you all for watching. And now it's time for my favorite part of the video, which is shouting out my patrons. Shout out Golden Boy 420. Shout out to Dakota Rawson, MC Bomb, and Donovan Gomez, as those are all of my $5 and above tier patrons who get shouted out at the end of every single one of these videos. And I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.